Begin tonight with the death of Dolly Parton at the age of 80, one of the most unifying forces in American public life.
On August 26th, the world woke up to news that so many people had quietly dreaded for months. Dolly Parton, the woman who had spent 7 decades turning a hardscrabble Tennessee childhood into one of the most beloved careers in American entertainment, had died at the age of 80. Her family confirmed that she passed peacefully in Nashville after a brief battle with cancer, surrounded by the people who loved her most. The announcement came from her nephew, who has served as her head of security for years, in a video shared on her social media accounts on behalf of the Parton and Owens families. He explained that Dolly had asked him, long before he ever expected to actually do it, to be the one to deliver the news when the day finally came. That detail alone tells you something about how deliberately Dolly planned even the ending of her own public life. She did not want strangers guessing at what happened. She wanted someone who loved her to say it plainly, with care, and then let the world grieve in its own way. To understand why her passing hit so many people so hard, you have to go back to where she started, because almost nothing about Dolly Parton's beginning suggested she would become one of the most recognized entertainers on the planet. She was born in January of 1946 in a one-room cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee, the fourth of 12 children in a family that had almost nothing in the way of money but plenty in the way of noise, humor, and music. Her father worked the land with his hands. Her mother sang constantly, filling the house with old mountain ballads and hymns that Dolly would absorb the way other children absorb the alphabet. She started singing in church before she could read, performing with her siblings on the porch, and writing her own songs before she was even a teenager. Even then, she wasn't content just repeating what she heard. She wanted to make something of her own, and that instinct never left her. Her uncle Bill Owens saw the spark early and pushed her toward opportunities most kids in that part of Tennessee never got, including local radio and television appearances that gave young Dolly her first real taste of performing for an audience beyond her family. The day after she graduated high school in 1964, she got on a bus for Nashville with barely any money and an enormous amount of determination. She has said many times that people warned her Nashville would chew her up, that a girl from the mountains with big dreams and big ahead didn't stand a chance. She proved them wrong methodically, one song at a time, writing for other performers before anyone would let her sing her own material on a national stage. Her first big break as a songwriter came when a recording of one of her songs became a hit for another artist in the mid-1960s, and not long after that she released her own debut record. But the real turning point came in 1967, when television host and country star Porter Wagoner brought her onto his enormously popular show. It was exactly the exposure she needed, putting her in front of millions of viewers every week. It also came with tension, because Wagoner had strong opinions about her sound and her direction, and Dolly increasingly wanted to write and record the material she believed in. That friction eventually pushed her toward independence. In 1973, while preparing to leave his show and strike out on her own, she wrote one of the most famous songs of her career as a way of processing that professional goodbye. It wasn't written as a love song between romantic partners at all. It was her way of thanking someone for years of partnership while telling him she needed to go. That same year she also released a song about a woman begging another woman not to take the man she loved, inspired by a real moment of jealousy from her own life. It became one of the most covered songs in popular music history, a testament to how she could take something deeply personal and specific and turn it into something nearly everyone could recognize in themselves. Through the 1970s and 80s, Dolly refused to be boxed into country music alone. She crossed into film and mainstream pop, starring alongside major Hollywood names in a workplace comedy that became a massive hit, writing and performing its title track along the way. She followed that with more film roles that introduced her to audiences who had never listened to a country record in their life. And through all of it, she never abandoned where she came from. She opened a theme park in the Smoky Mountains that bears her name, tying her business success directly back to the region that raised her, and she kept writing, kept touring, kept showing up for country music even as she conquered other worlds. Behind the rhinestones and the big blonde wigs was one of the sharpest business minds in entertainment. She held on to the rights to her own songwriting catalog at a time when that wasn't common, and that decision paid off enormously over the following decades as her music kept generating income long after it was first recorded, including through a cover version by another artist in the early 1990s that became one of the best-selling singles in music history. What made Dolly different from so many stars of her era wasn't just the talent. It was the way she held two things together that usually don't coexist in public life: enormous fame and genuine privacy. The clearest example of that was her nearly 60-year marriage to Carl Dean, a man who wanted almost nothing to do with the entertainment industry. They met outside a Nashville laundromat in 1964, when she was 18 and he was 21, and according to Dolly, he called out to her from his car with a joke about how she'd get sunburned dressed the way she was. They married 2 years later in a small, quiet ceremony in Georgia, at a moment when people around Dolly worried that marriage so young could hurt her career. She did it anyway. Over the following decades, as she became one of the most famous women alive, Carl did the opposite. He rarely appeared with her in public, avoided interviews, and kept his own life running outside the spotlight entirely. Some fans joked for years that he barely existed because he was photographed so rarely. Dolly always said the same thing when asked about it. Carl simply didn't want to be famous, and she respected that completely. Their very different lives may be part of why the marriage lasted as long as it did. She traveled constantly and worked with an enormous number of people across music, film, and business. He preferred staying home, and neither of them tried to force the other into a life they didn't want. That independence became the foundation of their relationship rather than a threat to it. Dolly has openly discussed one period in the 1980s when she became emotionally attached to someone outside her marriage during a difficult stretch in her life, describing it as an experience that caused her real pain, though she was always careful to frame it as an emotional connection rather than anything more. She also spoke about how secure Carl was in their relationship, which she said helped both of them weather the rumors that followed her for decades, including the persistent idea that theirs was some kind of open marriage. Much of that speculation grew out of her playful public personality, her willingness to joke about attraction with talk show hosts and co-stars, and famous working friendships like the one she shared with singer Kenny Rogers, whose chemistry with Dolly on stage and on record led plenty of people to assume there was something romantic behind it. Both of them denied it consistently, describing what they had as a rare and genuine friendship rather than anything hidden. Carl Dean died in March of 2025, after nearly 6 decades of marriage, at the age of 82. For Dolly, his death was unlike anything her career had prepared her for. There was no performance, no business deal, no clever reinvention that could soften that particular loss. She spoke publicly, if sparingly, about how much his absence affected her, and in the months that followed, her own health began to visibly decline. By 2026, she had postponed and then ultimately canceled a planned Las Vegas residency, explaining to fans that she was dealing with immune, digestive, and kidney-related health issues that required treatment and time to recover. She said she was responding well to her doctor's care, but needed to slow down, an admission that felt significant coming from a woman who had built her entire identity around never slowing down. She acknowledged that some of her physical decline seemed to trace back to the period when Carl himself had been ill, as though caring for him and then grieving him had quietly worn away at her in ways she hadn't fully shown the public. Even so, just days before she died, she was still talking about future plans, still describing herself as someone with more to accomplish, refusing to let her health struggles be the final word on who she was. That refusal to stop working, to stop creating, to stop showing up for her fans, ran through her entire life. It's part of why her death landed with such force across so many different corners of American culture, from country music legends to pop superstars to political figures, all of whom paused to describe what she had meant to them personally. Her nephew's message made clear that even in her final arrangements, Dolly was thinking of her family and her fans, choosing exactly how and when the news should reach the people who loved her. What made Dolly Parton extraordinary wasn't only the scale of her success, though few entertainers in history have matched it. It was the way she managed to remain recognizably herself through every stage of that success. The same warmth, the same humor, the same willingness to talk about her roots without a trace of embarrassment. She turned a childhood defined by scarcity into decades of generosity, funding literacy programs that sent hundreds of millions of books to children, supporting research initiatives, and giving back to the region that shaped her, all while continuing to write, perform, and build businesses well into her 70s. She lived long enough to become not just a singer or an actress, but a genuine American institution, someone whose loss touched people who had never listened to a country song in their life. In the end, What she leaves behind isn't defined by the final months of illness or the private grief over losing Carl. It's defined by everything she built before that, a body of work and a way of living that made an enormous number of people, across every possible background, feel like she somehow belonged to them personally. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.